welcome to The Myth Within. I'm Dr. Thomas Maples, and I'm glad that you've joined me here today. Today I wanted to do a revisit of one of my favorite fables from Aesop, the NorthWind of the Sun. And the reason I'm doing this is the other day I ran across a quote that really brought me to the foundation of my studies in history, which really began my career and moved me into the field of analytical psychology, where I find a home in my practice, helping individuals look at the symbols that really drive their personal development forward to an apex state. And when I began my early career in history, it was at a very progressive school. And even at this school, they warned that the premise of history is really built upon our need as humanity to learn from its mistakes. Now, the quote comes from George Santayana, who reminds us that those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. How pivotal is this quote in today's situation that we find ourselves in? I see throughout the world historical shrines being decimated and the past being covered up as if there is something to be guilt-laden about. And really, when we look with hindsight, we always see things perfectly. But the reason that this happens is, as what Isaac Newton alluded to when he said, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." This form of hindsight builds upon itself. You can't come to an ideal of perfection without itself being imperfect 1 minute later. What ends up happening is knowledge builds and stacks upon itself progressively. And when we begin to deny knowledge from the past, even though the winds will bellow, the winds of change may bellow to try and negate what is there, the true lessons are built upon through the psychological capacity to review what has and has not gone wrong, what could have been changed, and how can we begin to direct from this point on towards a future that allows for some form of sustainable progression without negating necessarily those dark moments that occurred as a means to learn from. Because when we don't learn from, ultimately we begin to repeat the similar behaviors. Now, I alluded to the idea that Isaac Newton said that if I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants. Isaac Newton did not exist in a vacuum. He built the idea of physics upon the sciences, and even that found their foundation in the arcane notion of heavenly bodies moving towards one another as a means for understanding the nature of reality that was created. Now, many of these individuals were highly devout men, highly devout women, even at that time. And what ends up happening is when we begin to negate the aspects of one part of their life while only studying the other, we fill a vacuum within that premise as a means to prove a point, but ultimately create its opposite on the other end. And so part of what we need to do here is to honor both the light and the dark. In the case of Newton, he was a devout person. The apple falls upon him. The apple's also very symbolic within Christian mythos as being a symbol of the forbidden fruit that brought humanity into consciousness itself. As you could see, there's a storyline that presents itself throughout that really alludes to the idea that we don't create knowledge from non-existence. We build upon it progressively, yet through a process of honoring that which came before. This is the idea behind the oral traditions that have long gone astray, as well as now the written traditions, which seem to be moving more towards less founded grounds of media. And so when I look at the quote, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it," I am reminded of Aesop's fable, The North Wind and the Sun. The North Wind and the Sun. The North Wind and the Sun had a quarrel about which of them was stronger. While they're disputing with much heat and bluster, a traveler passed along the road wrapped in a cloak. "Let us agree," said the Sun, "that he is the stronger who can strip that traveler of his cloak." "Very well," growled the North Wind, and at once sent a cold, howling blast against the traveler. How true is this in our day and age, where you have two arguing dichotomies present that are both trying to appease for the same person, or to strip them of their cloak to have them join their side. In modern times, it's not a stripping of the cloak that occurs. It's a thumbs up from someone not known, or a star, or a like, or a clappy hand emoji that agrees with one in the position they assume. Now here we see the North Wind and the Sun really representing the archetypes of this ideal of a paradox. There's two ends here. One windy, it blows, the other warm, and it glows. Both represent the Father in a way. The Father may bellow. Even in Christianity, God was wrathful in the Old Testament, yet loving in the New. Here we see the aspect of the heavens interacting with the nature of earth, the people that walk along its beautiful pathways. In political terms, even though I'm not going to look at the actual parties that are present, the same dichotomies exist in between the idea of progression versus conservation. Now, as we take a look at this ideal of the father archetype buying for the traveler to remove his cloak, we see the dichotomy present. There's the bellowing father, there's also the warming father. Now, the bellowing father howls, he gives commandment, he prohibits, while the warm and loving father embraces and loves. Now, later in the story, what we end up seeing is that ultimately the loving father ends up winning. And hopefully the weary traveler has some lessons that he could have learned from the process. Even though these lessons would never have been learned without the howling aspects of the wind. So when we look at it back into the idea of the quote that was presented by George Santayana, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it," we could begin to see that even in the most torrential of situations, there are kernels of golden truth or warmth to be elicited from these. What could we see in the climate of today? Can we find any aspect of middle ground, lessons to be learned from the howling winds, so we can move to the warmth? the glow that this archetype allows us to take part in. We cannot know light without dark, just as we cannot know the warmth without the bitter cold of the wind. What lessons will you take from this today? On whose shoulders do you stand? I thank you for listening and hope you enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you the next time, and wish you all namaste. May blessings find you as you advance confidently in the direction of your dreams. Bye.